I welcome this legislation, and time again, I think all of us who look at welfare realise that the single most disadvantaged group in society are lone parents. And all of the evidence, budget after budget, is that that is so. I also have a view, and I think it's well known here, that means testing can be very, very crippling, because you're trying to get above the basic payment the state pays. I mean, the €220 plus the child dependent allowance is subsistence. Let's call it what it is. It's pure subsistence. And therefore, we should hope that most people parenting alone would actually have more than that. And the other thing that I think we have to stress here, not only does it affect, obviously, the adults, but it's affecting the children and it's affecting the next generation. So when we look at intergenerational disadvantage, we find that children who come from less well-off backgrounds start at a disadvantage from day one. And therefore, we're affecting two generations in the one go. And I think anything that improves this is a good idea. Now, one thing, we spent a bit of time here talking about the liable relatives provision. But when you read the whole brief, it's one of these great cases where the total income was 400,000 and the cost of collecting the income of 590,000 or something. And it was costing you money. It was actually costing you money to have this provision. And the whole thing was worthless. And I applaud you for just getting rid of it. But in case anybody out there watching this thinks that the state is making a massive sacrifice here, they're actually saving a few €100,000. Now, in the greater scheme of things in welfare, it's not going to make much difference. But this is just a tidy up job. To me, the more important part here is how are you going to assess the means from maintenance payment. That's actually a more radical change here. And I welcome the idea that the child dependent money will not be assessed. But I think you need some very comprehensive way of making sure that how this differentiation is made between what goes to the parent and what goes to the child, because in the end of the day, it's not the 7-year-old child that's going to be handling any money that's given to the child.
Just for clarification, revenue do deal with this as well.
Yeah.
So that clarification is there within the revenue system.
But if somebody's going to court and all of these things, they have to be forewarned that it's much better to get the money for the child than for themselves. Because that's the way you're going to keep maximum amount of money. So I think we need to have a further debate just about the mechanics of this, and that the person going in looking for the maintenance realises the implications of the money being paid to them as opposed to being paid separately to them and the child. So, and remember, means testing is fairly penal, 50%. You'll probably say we're very generous, we're giving you 50%. The way I always look at that is that the highest rate of income tax in the country is only 40%. And lots of people paying 40% tax on good salaries are whinging about the 40%. So 50% is actually quite a penal rate of clawback. And are we really getting good value for that money? I'd actually question that. Because I actually am of the belief that the more you facilitate people parenting alone, or lone parents as they've been commonly called here today, in actually getting above the poverty threshold, the more you're investing in their children, in their future, and the more you're actually alleviating poverty in two generations. So I know it's not the basis of this bill, but I think it's something that we as a committee need to reflect on deeply. Now, I have a very specific question. In the brief it says, if the claimant has housing costs, i.e. rent or mortgage, then up to a maximum of €95.23. Now I suspect that not €95.23 goes back to the old punt days and has never changed since. And I'd be very interested if the department could provide me with the average cost of housing, rental or mortgages whenever this €95.23 was decided on. And do a comparison between that and today's cost of housing. Because I think compared to what was initially intended, you're going to find that it's absolutely derisory. And remember, people in all sorts of circumstances break up. It's just one of the facts of life. Other people have our own parents from the birth of the child. But there are many, many circumstances here, but some of them have taken on family commitments, mortgages, and so on. And I guarantee you, if you had a mortgage of a few €100,000, €95.23 a week is a very small amount off. So I think the first thing we need to do as a committee is gather a little bit of information as to when the €95.23 was set. And the second thing is, what was the average cost of housing to purchase and to rental in those days, and what is it now? And then we'll be able to work out an adjuster as to what it would be, even just to keep, even only to keep level with whatever was fixed at €95.23. I do welcome the bill. I think it's progressive, but if anything, it's too conservative. Just finally, is the €95.23 actually in the law? Is that a ministerial by order, or is this an actual legal decision? I suspect it's in the law. And if it isn't the law, I think it either gets changed here in this bill, or it should get changed in the Social Welfare Act bill later this year. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. And as always, you show your experience as a former minister in knowing the detail of this very well. It keeps us on our toes.
Someone has to make sure you earn your salaries.
That's no harm. It's good for us as well. So overall, as my understanding, I think the 95.23 has been around a long time. And as far as I know, it is one of those quirky figures, euro changeover amounts. Is that right? Yeah. So it is around a long time. In terms of
Pre-2002.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah, that's when the euro came in. So, like, just give us now, that's 20.
It's in the 90s, yeah. So in terms of how does it affect people now? So 95.23 is the housing disregard. The average maintenance payment is €58 per week, okay? So of the people getting maintenance, the figures I have here is that 40% have housing costs below that threshold. 24% use the full 95.23 to offset their maintenance amount. And on average, I think the amount of means in those cases that's assessed after the threshold is about €30. And about 36%, and we can give these figures follow-ups, save you having to try and scribble them. 36% of those in receipt of maintenance have no housing costs. So what that says is that 76% are covered, fully covered, and 24% use the full extent of the 95.23, and after that, the amount assessed is about €30. Is that right?
It's
Nicola, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it'd be even less when there's the housing disregard is applied. Yeah.
All right. So
just in general, the average is about €58, which with no housing disregard works out about €30. So when the housing disregard is applied, it's even less, if any remains.
So overall, before we talk about disregard, the amount in play is about €30 in general.
But the opposite to that is if you like, can you tell me how many people in receipt of one-parent family payment?
One-parent family payment is 41,000.
And including the transition?
Transition is another 20,000.
Right. Now, how many of those, when the assessment of maintenance is applied, are actually having a deduction because of maintenance?
Do we have that?
I don't have that exact figure.
We get that figure because
Get that, yeah.
my view is why reduce people to poverty and affect the next generation? And this is what we're doing. And particularly in breakup, this applies to people who are, and we all come across them, comfortably off, and the next thing the world falls apart. In large amount, it's the more common case of maintenance, where there's a marriage breakdown and so on. And that tends to be really dramatic and traumatic on the children. And my view is, adding a poverty layer into this is only adding to our future problems. So we're being penny wise and pound foolish. And the more you allow people to keep maintenance money or whatever within reason. And I'm not talking about very wealthy people who've got big maintenance orders against them. But I'm talking about people who would be a bit, better off and wouldn't have such a collapse in their lifestyle. But that's no harm because of the future implications of poverty versus a more stable and better funded upbringing. Also, I think that it would make it, the other part of this is, of course, it's very important that the courts then enforce the maintenance absolutely strictly, because then you'd really help one-parent families who have access to maintenance to keep out of the poverty trap. There's no point in putting everybody down. There was a saying at home about people who, if you're down a hole, will pull you out, but if you climb the ladder, will pull the ladder from under you. Now, I accept that social welfare is great for stopping you falling down the hole, but at times, the minute you try to go up the ladder, it's coming after you fairly with a vengeance, with means testing.
Thanks. Mr. Hessian.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. I think what we're sort of seeing here in the overall figure is that 75% are covered entirely by the housing disregard, and the remaining 25%, 24% are getting the full benefit of disregard. Carving out child maintenance it will in future no longer be part of the picture. So that disregard is now applying only to the residual portion. In the case of, we still have some work to do on this, but in case of most lone parent cases we're talking about, if there's a court order, then that's all very clear. But in a lot of lone parent cases where there isn't an ongoing relationship between the two people, there isn't really a basis for the payment of spousal maintenance. So in most cases, you're talking really only about child maintenance, really, is all that's in play. So when we talk about these disregards into the future, the amount of money they're applying to will no longer in future include child maintenance. It'll just be the spousal bit. So I think, while I take your point about that the figure hasn't moved, broadly speaking, for the majority, let's say 75% of cases, it's doing its job in covering off the housing cost, and in future, I think we completely agree with you. This is a vulnerable cohort, high poverty rates, much higher than the general population, and certainly from our point of view, we would hope that decoupling child maintenance from the social welfare system means that can be a separate, untouched income source for the household that's not going to have a knock-on effect to their payment. So we certainly hope we're in the business of helping people, if they're in a hole, out of it. But there is always, in all our schemes, that nexus between, where a person's income gets to a point where they may need less support for the social welfare system or their employment. That's always the tricky bit. We come across all our schemes, as you would know from your experience, that when people have other sources of income, whether it's from employment or elsewhere, or where they have a degree of financial independence, that design choice about how do you hand over from the social welfare system to somebody leaving a payment and just being financially independent, that's a really tricky part of the
I know, and I know that, what's said in the street and all the rest on one side. But the other side story, let's say that, we're going to be coming in here and we got all these targets. What do they call them?
The performance indicators.
Performance indicators. So let's take it to 10% and bring COP to 95. First of all, it's not a big cost to the department if you increase it dramatically, back to where it was. And secondly, if you had a performance indicator, we are going to take 10% of one-parent families out of poverty, it would be a hell of an achievement.
Yeah.
So for very little money, it's this little kind of, as I said, we'll help you up to a point, and then when you start jumping out. But particularly in this case, because as I keep emphasising, we're talking about 2 generations here. My view is every cohort of people we can get out of the catch-22 that's involved in these schemes, the better.
Mr. Hession?
Well, all I would say is, that's certainly our intention. We are trying to put in place supports that, more generally, even outside of this particular bill, that will help lone parents. There's obviously a raft of budget measures we've done in terms of rates, disregards, and other supports. That's certainly our intention, and one of our priorities as a department is addressing those elevated poverty rates for lone parents, disabled people, etc., where there are clearly multiples of what is.
In the end of the day, I suppose at this stage what I'd like to get is what I asked for, is what the 95 would be in today's money. And I suppose it'd be interesting too to find out how much it would cost. In your estimate, you seem to be saying for very little money to raise that to at least, in real terms, of what it was when it was set.